This is an in-depth class on the Peacock Pose, also called mayurasana or elbow lever if you prefer the calisthenics terminology. Now, this pose is pretty special because it's one of the 15 primary asanas described in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and it's said in that text to cure all diseases quickly, to help with digestion, and even make you immune to the most deadly poison. Now, of course, this is not true. I don't recommend eating any poison, but still it could be really cool to practice this pose and notice its effects, experience its effects on you. Okay, now let's break it down bit by bit, starting at the wrists. Now I saw other video tutorials on this claiming that you need a ton of wrist flexibility and you need to really work on your wrists for this, otherwise you will injure yourself. And then they demo the pose and they don't have the correct technique, or they do it and they're huffing and puffing, indicating that it took them a lot of effort. If you do this pose correctly, yes, you need some wrist flexibility, but it's not more than a normal crow, which we've covered in another video, and it shouldn't be extremely difficult. So yes, you need to warm up your wrists, and I have a good warm-up and conditioning routine that I can link in the description, but you don't need to have superhuman wrists to do this pose. Now, the main challenge with this pose is that you need to have your hands, your base of support, under your center of gravity, which is usually the top of your hip bone. And the confusion in this pose comes from the fact that there are many things you can do and tweak to make that easier or harder. So let's talk about them separately. First, you have the position of the hand. If you can't reach your center of gravity because it's too low, one way to do this is to turn out the hand. And now you've turned from being able to reach this point to being able to reach this point. Now, a lot of people don't like that because they say it's dangerous for the wrist, but if you stick around, I'm going to cover what you can do to make that actually not dangerous at all for the wrist and make that your preferred way of reaching for that center of gravity. Now, there are other things you can do. For example, you can make yourself shorter by either bending the legs or doing lotus, and then you don't even have to turn the wrists. Look, I'm not going to turn the wrists, they're here, and I can make myself shorter and still be able to do the mayurasana. You can also do lotus in this. I wanted to also show it in lotus to see how you can enter it. So same thing, I won't turn out the wrists, even though I have a habit to do so, and then you can do it in lotus like so. Now, you may have noticed this, but when we shorten the legs, we don't need to reach down so far to the top of the hip bone like we mentioned earlier, because the center of gravity has moved up by shortening the legs and keeping the upper body the same. Now, if you really don't want to reach down, there is a second way to straighten the legs and still feel shorter in the horizontal direction, and that is by tilting up. Since our legs are going to be longer than our upper body, when tilting up, the legs are shortened a lot while the upper body is shortened a little bit, and they kind of cancel each other out. It's not as fun to hold the pose this way, and a lot of the people who do it this way will get tired really quickly, but we'll demonstrate it. You can turn out the wrists here, and then you might feel, oh, I need a lot of wrist flexibility, or you can keep them neutral. I'll do whichever, and you see here, it's a little bit more intense, but it works. Now, another thing people do and teach that I don't really like, in order to be able to reach down without tilting and without shortening the legs, is to round the spine a lot. So if you round the spine, you're able to reach lower, but at what cost? The pose looks very awkward and is not very pretty, and it's not very comfortable, and I don't think that's a good way to do it. Okay, here's the big thing that will make this so much easier that nobody is talking about. Opening at the elbow joint. Yes, you need a little bit of bicep strength to hold your body in that position, but look at this. If you don't, this is going to be horizontal, right? If you don't open the elbows, this is going to stretch out your wrist, you're going to have to tilt. If you open the elbows a little bit more, then the wrists are no longer stretched out. So I'm going to show you really quick. I it might feel like I'm stretching out, but as soon as I'm leaning forward, and we'll talk about the entry in a bit, notice my wrists are arguably in less extension than I would in a normal crow. Okay, so the main takeaway so far is that if you're willing to extend your elbows a little bit, then your hand placement could be anywhere between here or here. So I like to do it here, so I have to extend less. But if I'm doing it on bars, I can do it like this. If I'm doing it on a bench, I can do it like this. As long as you're not doing it like this, then you won't be able to fully extend and fully open the elbows. These things will start working against each other. But if you open the elbows just like this or like this, doesn't matter. Now, let's talk about the elbow position and we'll cover the entry. Now, you want to be able to hold yourself. But I've seen a lot of tutorials talk about bringing it so close together. But look at this. If the elbow is by my side, it's here. When it's closer to the center, it's here. I just lost a lot of height, and that's why people have issues with this pose. So don't bring them in too much. Just bring them far enough to have your elbow pressing on your colon, the sides of your colon, and your humerus pressing on your ribs. So you don't have to tense your abs so much because the ribs are also taking some of the load. Now, when you have this position in place, I can put my hands like this or like this, like we talked about. And now I'm not putting weight in my hands yet. I keep the weight on my lower body until my wrist is in a safe position. So I'm leaning forward, very little weight on my wrists. I'm leaning forward. Now that my wrist is in a safe position, I'll move back so you can see it. Now that my wrist is in a safe position, now I can start lifting the legs either this way or like this, but opening a little bit more at the elbows. Now that we've covered the entry, I want to talk a little bit about how it feels like to balance and hold the pose. So this is a balancing pose, meaning that you will be making small tweaks and adjustments with various parts of your body to keep yourself in balance. But you could either do it so that you're perfectly centered, which is unrealistic, or that you're mostly about to fall over and continuously trying to save it, or that you're mostly about to fall under and continuously trying to save it. I like the last one, so I am always feeling like I'm about to fall back on my feet, and I give myself a little bit of push with the fingers to stabilize myself. If I'm doing it on a bar, then I don't care. I can balance either way. But if I'm doing it on the floor, I really don't want to fall on my face, which, by the way, you can use a pillow when starting out. So I'm continuously feeling like I keep weight in my feet, a little bit, boom. But still, my weight is predominantly trying to go back onto my feet. Okay? So now that you know all of the theory, you need to know a little bit about how to practice this. Fortunately, even though you now know all of the theory and technique around this pose, you still have to practice it quite a bit. So the best way to do this, I recommend, is to not try to extend the legs right away. And if the wrist thing is a little bit confusing, just do 45 degrees to the top or neutral. Same methodology. Put your elbows, put some weight on the ribs and in the sides of the stomach, and keep them a little bit close together. As you lean forward, start leaning forwards and try to lift the knees. Only once you can do that for about 20 seconds, start to apply, come back to this video, watch it again, and start to apply every piece of advice various times on the pose itself, and you will be able to reach the full thing.